All right, we're getting into assessment and a little bit into intervention. The assessment, because it's part of the sorting children into disabled or not disabled in as far as the systems are concerned, right? Whether or not they get benefits for insurance because they have the right diagnosis or because they have the right category to receive educational services. It is not an inconsequential part of our job, right, to help people, get the services that they need. And the necessary evil part of that is that often that requires us to sort people into these, recognizable categories in terms of the state, in terms of the school system, in terms of insurance, in terms of all of these systems that people have to navigate. So because a big part of what people expect us to do is to make a statement about whether or not somebody's status is atypical to such a degree that they qualify for services. Now we're getting into, now that we're halfway through the semester, you probably know, right? Some of the problems and complications with that way of thinking, the normal, abnormal, that deficit lens. But again, in the beginning of the semester, we talked about, right, 1 foot in the real world and 1 foot in our aspirations. So the foot in the real world this is a very deficit-oriented world that we live in. Our job is quite medicalized. And so how do we do this job with some degree of mindfulness? And so let's talk about assessments, to make that determination that a child in front of you or an adult in front of you, that the ways in which they are using their language to come to a conclusion that they're showing features that are more like disability and not like multilingual learning development language usage that doesn't have, it's even hard to talk about without using deficit words, that isn't tied to functional impairments. We have so much research in our field. We've been doing this for decades and decades. We know what the best practices are to tell language difference from language disorder. Again, I'm using terms that we use in our field. I resist, right, a lot of this discourse, but when we go back to doing kind of the work as it's defined in a lot of places, I have to fall into that framework. So the best practices for differentiating difference from disorder is actually pretty clear cut. There are, you want to demonstrate that whatever is happening across languages. One of the biggest features of something being a multilingual, typical, way of using language versus a language disability is a language disability should occur no matter what the language the person is using. No matter the language that the person is using. Whereas, if you only see, right, a student at school struggling in English to communicate, but then if you put them in a communication environment where they can freely use the languages that they're more comfortable with, and all of those struggles seem to fall away, then you're looking at a language difference. So it's in essence, as simple as that. And so why is it that decades now we've been talking about best practice and we're still having trouble? People still routinely have trouble differentiating one from another. And it is tied to some of these systemic constraints that a big one is, that the gatekeeping systems that approve for funding, that give you insurance, that offer you the educational services you need. They want to see numbers, and where do you get numbers except from standardized tests? And so once you're using a standardized test, you're comparing the child or adult to norms that typically are monolingual, English speaking, middle class, and white. So that's why it's so hard to tell these things apart, is because the tools that we're using treats any deviance the same way. It's just deviance, right? We're putting deviance in quotes. Whether it's deviance because of, the origin is some, processing issue, some articulation difficulties, some language delays, or whether the issue is English is not your first language, or that you're speaking a dialect that is not valued in the school. It yields the same results often, and so it is hard to tell one from the other, and it just seems like we're treading the same ground over and over again. But there's plenty of resources to teach you how to do that, and we'll link you to some of them and talk about some of them here.